But again, if you're pairing foods, you can still add that balance and still get similar effects, and you don't have to avoid simple carbs is what I'm trying to emphasize here. Welcome to the Complete Nutrition Podcast.
The podcast where we break free from the dieting cycle and explore sustainable, realistic ways to improve your health.
I'm Kylie, a registered dietitian with over 10 years of experience.
And I'm Spencer, and I've been eating food my entire life. And I happen to be a nurse.
Each week, we dive into the science, psychology, and strategies behind mindful eating and sustainable change.
Whether you're here to transform your relationship with food, learn how to make lasting lifestyle changes, or are simply curious about what true health looks like, you're in the right place.
We invite you to subscribe and tag along if you'd like to stop dieting and start living.
This episode is brought to you by glucose. So glucose is a simple sugar, and we're going to talk about what that means later versus complex sugars. And simple sugar is synonymous with a simple carb, and carbs are what we are talking about. So that's why glucose is the star of the show this morning. So glucose was discovered in the 1700s by a German scientist.
1700s? That was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. I kind of wanted to look up how he did it, but then I didn't care enough to look it up. But he discovered it in the 1700s, which is pretty insane. There were a lot of smart folks. Glucose is the main source of energy for our body. That's why it's so important. And it mostly is stored in the liver, and then it's also stored in the muscles in glycogen, which we're going to be talking about some of that as well. But yeah, there you go.
Well, okay. I want to know, Spencer, what do you hear about carbohydrates? When you think about carbohydrates, what do you think of? What are the vibes around carbs?
Yeah, so even me, who I feel like I haven't been affected nearly as much as some people are by diet culture, or feeling like I need to live up to the standards that everybody has, and just especially I feel like, tell me if I'm wrong, but females feel that a lot more, I feel like, or are told that a lot more than men are a lot of the time. But even me, even in my situation, I still sometimes feel like, oh, I can't eat too many carbs, like I'm gonna get a belly or something like that. And that's so sad. I'd say that's the most common myth that I hear, that eating carbs is going to make you fat or something.
And I agree. I think there's so much fear mongering around carbohydrates. So many people fear carbs and feel like they need to reduce them, and feel like they are almost like the scapegoat to all their health issues. And even in media, I don't know if you remember this, I get this all the time. A lot of people, when I'm reviewing educations, or if I'm teaching someone with diabetes how to carb count for insulin corrections, a lot of people get confused about butter and think that butter is a carbohydrate, which it's a fat.
I remember I told you that one time, or I
oh, really?
said something about that.
I don't remember.
We can't do too much butter. And you got mad at me. Spencer.
Well, I think that comes from, there's a scene in Mean Girls where she is telling her that butter contains carbohydrates, and I don't know, do you remember that part where she's trying to make the one girl gain weight or whatever?
That's
Anyways,
so
it's definitely in media, it's definitely talked about, and so carbohydrates get a really bad rap. So hopefully today we can help clear some of that up, talk about carbs, help put them up there on that pedestal with protein, that they are actually really important, and we need to actually, most of our intake ideally needs to be coming from carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm. Like we said, glucose is the main source of energy for our body, and carbohydrates are glucose.
Or glucose is a carbohydrate.
Yes, sorry. That's why I'm not a dietitian. Glucose is a carbohydrate. Okay, so what are carbohydrates?
I like to explain it. Carbohydrate is an umbrella term. So, sugar is a carb, glucose is a carb, starch is a carb, fiber is a carbohydrate. And it is a broad term that has a lot of subcategories. So, this is going to get a little bit chemistry. Go back to your high school chemistry days. So, sugar stands for saccharide, and there are different molecular structures of sugar. So you've got monosaccharides, which are one molecule sugars.
Like
That's what
glucose,
glucose. Yep,
right?
glucose, fructose, and galactose. And then we have disaccharides, so double sugar molecules. And that's what we commonly know as like table sugar, lactose in milk, and then maltose is another one. And those are our simple sugars. Simple meaning that they are easy to digest, they're short chain, they're not very big molecules, and
They get
they
used
get
as energy quickly, right?
yeah, they're because they're so easy to digest. There's just one bond or no bond if it's a monosaccharide that you have to break down. When we digest sugars, we have to break them down into their single molecule form and then get converted to glucose in order to be utilized in our metabolism. So that's why simple sugars are quick energy, or simple sugars are quick energy because they're so small molecularly.
Mm-hmm.
And then polysaccharides, meaning multiple chains of glucose, make up starch and fiber. And this is where I'm a big nerd when it comes to biochemistry. So, starch and fiber are multiple chains of glucose, which I think sometimes especially with judging carbohydrates, we judge and say, okay, sugar is bad for us. But really, no matter what source we are eating, our body's going to digest that carbohydrate down to be glucose. Sure, foods are packaged differently and they're digested differently, but ultimately it all becomes glucose. So, starches and fiber are just these long chains of glucose. And the difference between starch and fiber, so starch has something called alpha bonds that is connecting all of the glucose molecules, and we can digest alpha bonds. We have enzymes that help break those down.
I remember this.
Yeah,
Now,
and then fiber contains beta bonds, and we do not contain the enzymes to digest those.
but
Cows and
cows and stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
goats, herbivores do. And so, um, and and so we cannot digest those. However, our gut bacteria can. So fiber is really important for our gut microbiome as well.
Because they break down the fiber, and then the byproducts are what we use, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
I guess that's a whole other subject. But
Yeah. Yep.
anyway, pretty
Yes.
cool. Very cool. Okay. That was a useful rerun of
Yeah, your chemistry.
some basic, yeah. Okay. So what do we need carbohydrates for is my next question.
Well, first and foremost, they provide energy. And again, going back to your chemistry days, the term glycolysis, so glucose is the star of that show. Glucose starts glycolysis and then runs through our metabolism, through the Krebs cycle, through the electron transport chain, and ultimately it drives our metabolism, how we obtain energy. It also, carbohydrates also provide storage, so energy storage, which we need like during the night when we're not eating, we utilize our excess storage. And anytime if we skip a meal, because we have the ability to store carbohydrates either through glycogen in our liver and muscles or as fat, it allows us to maintain the blood sugars that we need. And then it also helps maintain our gut microbiome. Like we said that before, plant foods are prebiotics or foods for our gut microbiome, our bacteria in our gut, and they help to maintain really good gut fauna and flora for us.
Okay, so I have a question. Maybe this is a dumb question. So I know that we need glucose as energy, and that starches are just like a more complex form of energy and that sort of thing. And it just gets broken down into glucose eventually, right? The
Right.
starches do.
Right.
So, and starch is just like a long term storage solution or like a slower release energy, basically, right?
Right.
Okay. So, why could we just like eat straight sugar and then I know we need like all the other necessary things from food, like, like fiber and that sort of thing. But could I just like eat straight sugar and then all of the other food groups, like the fats and protein, I guess? Am I missing one? Carbohydrates, fat,
Yeah, those
protein.
are your
So
macronutrients.
if
Yep.
I just ate just straight sugar
Yeah.
and then I got fat and protein from other things,
Could you survive?
would I survive? Like,
Yeah.
is that possible?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a good question. So, I mean, that's technically similar to sometimes I will have patients who can't use their intestines. And so we will give them intravenous feedings or total parenteral nutrition. So, IV nutrition. Do you have
Hmm.
patients on TPN in your
Yeah, and that
facility?
that makes sense. So
Yeah.
that's just like straight glucose that they're
Yeah,
injecting. I
I
don't
mean
really know
that's what
what
you put.
TPN is
That's
composed
what you
of, but
put in their bag of nutrients is basically just straight. It's actually dextrose, which is basically like glucose. So glucose and then amino acids and then like fatty acids. So basically just straight
it's like the
simple
building blocks.
molecules that
Mm.
gets just straight absorbed. And then obviously we have to supplement with micronutrients. So they usually get different vitamins and minerals that are added to those bags. So yeah, if you were to just consume sugar in addition to, I don't know, like straight fat and protein with a multivitamin, didn't sound pleasant, but
You
you
would
could
survive.
probably get what you need. Yeah.
That sounds terrible. So how much glucose, or I guess not glucose, sorry, how much carbohydrates do we need?
So remember last time when we talked about proteins, we talked about the AMDRs, the acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges,
Yeah.
that those come from the Institute of Medicine. And it breaks down basically the percentage of our caloric intake that ideally needs to be coming from carbohydrates.
Let me see if I remember protein.
Yeah.
Protein was what, 30 up to 35%?
Yeah, 10 to 35%.
10 to 35%.
Yep. And then
Nice.
carbohydrates is 45 to 65%. So
Which is a lot.
definitely the bulk of our calories need to be coming from carbohydrates because it's our main source of energy.
Like basically around half, and then the other 2 quarters are protein and fat.
Right, right.
Interesting.
And to further clarify too, because there are so many subcategories of carbohydrates, people often want to know, okay, well, if I need that many carbohydrates, is that just from, pasta and bread, or what does that mean?
Mm.
And
That's why I was asking about sugar.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. Like
like-
where can you get those carbs from?
yeah.
So have you ever explored the new MyPlate, the USDA's, it's the new version of, we grew up with the My Pyramid.
Yeah. That's what I remember in elementary school.
And then it was after I graduated college when it was like in the early 2000s that they changed to MyPlate.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been on their website? Or
Not
Okay.
really, no.
Well, you should. So myplate.gov, they have a really cool feature that you can go in and put in your demographics, so your age, your gender, your height, and then they will generate an estimation of how many servings of each food group. And it's actually a really interesting evaluation. I'll have my clients do that, and we'll sit down and write down what did you eat today, and then tally up how many servings of each food group to check their balance. So carbohydrates are going to be in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and then, I should say any grains, and then dairy as well. And we do need a balance of all of those. And if you want to jump over to
Always a
myplate.gov,
balance.
yeah, that will help to give you a feel for, okay, how much for someone my size or my age is ideal.
So who would need, I guess, more or less, like, because you said, like, obviously there's a scale. Who would
Right.
need more
Right.
carbohydrates? Like, is there a case for that?
Yeah, so more activity. So if you are moving more, your muscles utilize glucose and need more energy. And so I would say active. If you are active, especially athletes, you are needing more carbohydrates. And that, and even like jumping into the whole athlete thing too with myths around carbs, I have worked with several athletes who feel like they need to eat less, and it definitely impacts their performance.
Mm.
So carbohydrates is so important for all of us, but especially if you are more active, you definitely need to be in that higher percentage range of probably closer to 65% of your calories coming from carbohydrates.
Mm. That's like, I guess, carb loading before a marathon or something is what
Yeah.
that's what they say.
Yeah.
That also, it reminds me, sorry.
No, you're good.
When I was in wrestling in high school, this is an extreme example. There was a kid who didn't eat for like a day and a half to try and make weight for his wrestling
Oh my gosh.
match, and he made weight, but he was immediately pinned, and it's because I mean, obviously he had no energy, like he had
Yeah.
no carbohydrates at all.
Yeah, perfect example. So
Yeah,
you
and
definitely need more.
that was the hardest thing. Like I wanted to eat so much, and then I would have to suck weight, so I couldn't eat anything. So I would literally just eat just straight rice, and that was it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Oh my
because it had
gosh.
carbs,
That
but
is so crazy.
it was pretty terrible.
Now on the flip side, I have done a little bit of I have dabbled in endurance running, and carb loading is my absolute favorite thing to do before a race. It is quite the most joyful thing ever. Okay, but then you also asked who needs less. And unlike protein, where we talked about certain conditions where you actually do need less than that percentage, I would really say nobody needs less. There are some conditions that you do need to watch portion size and watch or eat carbohydrates in moderation, but there aren't really any conditions where you need to restrict necessarily. So I would say the first thing that comes to mind are people with diabetes. You definitely need to be careful about your carb intake and make sure that you're eating balanced to watch blood sugars, but you do not need to cut out carbohydrates. I think that's a big misconception, even from physicians. I will often hear physicians tell their patients, cut out the carbs, cut out anything white. And then I get these clients that are so desperate and are so just like emotionally distraught because of how hard this transition is. And then they get to me, and then we re-educate and stress portion size and pairing. So really there's not anyone that needs less, but with diabetes, it is a general recommendation to just watch portions and then pair with protein and fiber and fats to get that balance.
So wait, when you say controlling portion sizes, though, that does sound like doing less carbohydrates. Like, how is that not equivalent?
Yeah. So I would if the recommendation is 45 to 65%. Someone with diabetes, I would say maybe let's stick closer to the 45%. So watching portions.
But still within the limit, though.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yep.
Okay. So also here's another question. For somebody who is trying to lose weight for whatever reason, I know that everybody always says, like, cut back your carbohydrates. Like, is that true?
I think where carb gets such the bad rap is that they're easy to eat a lot of because they are quick energy. So we digest them and we store them very quickly. And so it's easy to eat a lot. If you eat like a carb heavy breakfast, like a big plate of pancakes, it'll fill you up for maybe an hour, but within the next couple of hours, you'll be hungry again.
That's very valid.
If you pair that with, let's say you add some bacon and some eggs, you're going to digest that a lot slower, and you won't be as hungry. So I think that's where they get to be the culprit in terms of weight management, is that it's very easy to eat a lot of. We digest it, we store it, and then we're hungry again.
So we eat more.
So we can eat in excess if that balance is not there.
Okay. So it really just comes down to balance, is
right.
What it always
the
is
ABCs
sounding
of
like.
nutrition.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Balance. B for balance. Okay. So we've talked about, like, who needs less and who needs more and that sort of thing. We mentioned at the beginning talking about complex or simple carbohydrates. Give us a quick dietitian rundown of what that means.
So simple carbs are going to be those short chain carbohydrates. So your single molecules, the like glucose, fructose, galactose, and then the double molecules, which those are considered simple sugars. Those are found in table sugar and fruits, and sweet things. And when people hear that, I hear this all the time, that fruit is bad and we shouldn't eat fruit. Again, trying to destroy some of these myths and facts that all foods fit, and there is a your brain might look at fruit or might look at dessert and think, oh, this is so bad for me, but your body's going to break it down into glucose and utilize it for energy. And there is a place for all of those foods. And we'll get more into some of that, the psychology of moderation too, and dive into more of that. But I think for the purpose of this episode is knowing that truly all foods fit, regardless if they're simple or complex. So simple sugars are more of the sweets and the fruits, digest a little bit faster. So if you do have concerns with blood sugars, when you do consume simple sugars, it would be like a general health guideline is maybe to pair it with some nuts or cheese stick or something else if you're worried about blood sugars. And regardless of blood sugars, it would help you digest those and keep you full for longer if you were eating those. Complex carbohydrates, those are your longer chains of glucose molecules. So that's going to be in things like potatoes, in bread, pasta, even like your fruits and your vegetables have complex carbohydrates. They have starch, they have fiber in them. They're digested slower, so they give you more sustained energy. And in terms of like blood sugar management, they don't give you, or they just give you a slowed energy release or a slowed release of sugar. But again, if you're pairing foods, you can still add that balance and still get similar effects, and you don't have to avoid simple carbs is what I'm trying to emphasize here.
So you can eat brownies. You can't just eat only brownies.
Right.
You have to eat brownies and maybe some cucumbers.
Well,
or something.
and not even have to. I don't think you have to have these rules.
You can do whatever you want.
I don't want to fear monger around simple carbs. That truly all foods fit, and we need 45 to 65% of carbs and a mixture of simple and a mixture of complex, and all of those foods are going to be packaged with different nutrients. And so getting a variety of different foods, different food types, and you'll be fine.
Very good, very good. Brownies are also very good. We love brownies. Always eat brownies. Okay, so I have a couple other questions. So what happens if I don't get enough or if I eat too many carbs? Talking about fear-mongering stuff.
Okay. Well, let's start with too many carbohydrates and you're only eating carbs. So let's say if you were to just eat straight carbohydrates and not have that balance, eventually you would start to have some protein deficiencies. I would say it's really hard for that to happen, so not a huge concern. If you don't get enough, on the flip side, that's where we start to see some of like the keto diets where they limit your carbohydrate intake. They limit to your carbohydrate intake to be quite small, to the point where your body doesn't have enough glycogen on board to run glycolysis, so it shifts your metabolism
to ketosis.
To ketosis, yeah. So ketosis pulls from your fat stores, and then from ketosis, you totally bypass glycolysis, and then you just enter from a different substrate, the Krebs cycle, and then you can go through and make your energy and all of that. And that's why keto has been such this big craze, because it does pull from your fat stores. However, the research, there hasn't been any long-term studies.
Because it hasn't been around long enough
right?
Yeah,
it hasn't been around for long enough. And I haven't seen any studies that were longer than a few years that they looked at the keto diet. And so, I mean, we don't know 10 or 15 years down the road how that impacts our body to be in a state of ketosis. And furthermore, I would say the idea of sustainability. Could you go without carbs?
No, I mean, I wouldn't want to in the first place, so I guess that's a problem. But
I I don't think I could. I think it would definitely drive like some disordered eating, binge eating for me to restrict.
yeah,
And
yep.
that's what I see with my clients is that it drives overconsumption and that they'll do it for a couple of months and then end up crashing and burning. Which that being said too, like no harsh judgment against I know a few people who do follow keto and have been doing it for years and years and it works for them. Because it works for them doesn't mean that it has to work for you too. And I would say vast majority, we do so much better eating carbohydrates and eating within that moderation.
Yeah, moderation rather than extremism, I guess. Like just the psychological side of it
Right,
sounds
right. And
difficult.
I'll
But
also add too, if you aren't getting enough, so if you're in a state of ketosis, this is different, but if you aren't getting enough during your day of carbohydrates, your body starts to spit out hunger hormones that crave high carb, high fat foods as a starvation or a survival mechanism. And it's like your animalistic brain steps in and says, okay, we're in famine mode. We need to find foods that are going to help us survive. And you start to crave more of those. And so, in terms of, healthy eating in all of its glory, we want to eat consistently, balance consistently. And so, making sure that you've got carbs early in your day with breakfast, midday, and snacks throughout the day to keep your metabolism happy and keep those starvation hormones that make you crave these foods at bay.
And I think we're going to talk about the keto diet specifically in a whole other episode later.
Yes. Yep.
Because that's a whole thing.
Yes.
Okay. We've kind of talked about it a little bit already, but talk to us about sugar. Why is it so bad? I mean, I kind of asked it before, like, could I survive off just sugar? But tell me more about.
Well, I would say let's get rid of this label for sugar of being bad. Food should not have a label, like we said. Our brain might look at sugar and say, okay, this is a bad food. I shouldn't eat that. But your body's going to digest it, utilize it in glycolysis, and it will be fine. But anything in excess, so if sugar in excess, it can be inflammatory for our condition, and it can if you think about inflammatory conditions, it can increase inflammation for people with like joint pain. There's also been some studies that, again, sugar in excess can increase risk for things like cardiovascular disease. And we need to be mindful and eat things all in moderation. That doesn't mean to swing to the extreme of never eating sugar, because it definitely can fit. Even in the I believe it's the USDA, they come out with the American dietary guidelines and they re-update them every 5 years. And their recommendation for the amount of sugar that would be ideal in a day definitely is inclusive of having a treat every single day. So definitely in moderation, and I don't think you need to be eliminating sugar. And I would say that better the focus if you feel like some of these other carbs, maybe your grains or your fruits and vegetables aren't as high, focus on adding those foods back in as opposed to cutting the sugar out. And that will help you with that balance, but not feel like you're on a diet or feel like you're having to restrict.
You'll get full from the other foods.
But still remembering that, sugar is still part and totally okay.
Yeah.
In all things in moderation.
If you have the balance, you won't overeat the carbohydrates.
Right.
You'll eat the balanced meal and then you'll be good. Hopefully. Right?
So to speak. Yes.
So to speak. Yeah. Never as easy as it sounds.
Again, I don't like using the word good. Like good or bad. I think
perfectly neutral meal.
That if you again are just having this balance throughout the day, you will be receiving nutrition that is adequate and balanced and appropriate.
Very nice. We like appropriate food. So let's summarize. We've talked about a lot and we're kind of reaching the end, and I just want to talk about some of the main points that we've talked about.
Carbohydrates are important. I would say we need more of them than protein and fats in all their varieties.
So we
fruits,
survive.
veggie, grains, dairy products. And should they be victimized and be the culprits? No, we need variety. We need them. They're important. And and I would say maybe as example or sample goal for this week, maybe track your different food groups and see specifically what carbohydrate food groups that maybe you're out of balance in that you need to add more of. Take a look at the myplate.gov, and see what those recommendations are, and focus on adding in variety and maintaining that balance.
Which, just to recap, the types of different carbs are like starch, fiber, and simple sugars, right?
Yes, from a chemical perspective, but from a food group perspective, it's fruits, vegetables, grains, and dairy.
Thank you. Okay, so that's what you should look at to see what you should add more of and what you need more of out of those.
And
Okay.
then, well, again, so invitation for weekly challenge is maybe identify what carbohydrate group or food group you need to increase and focus on that. Also, if you have a fear of carbohydrates, maybe you need to allow yourself to start to heal that relationship with carbs and let yourself to eat the carbs that you need. And if this is you and this is speaking to you, I would invite you to keep listening to these episodes. We will definitely jump into emotional eating and deprivation and scarcity mindset and how you can start to heal this relationship with food if you do have a strong fear around carbohydrates, or if this was hard to hear that sugar is okay or that carbs are okay, that definitely this is something that you should keep listening to and start to heal your relationship with food so that you can look at a plate of salad and a brownie with this and have the same emotional reaction.
I mean, I've already noticed just in this episode some misconceptions that I still have, and I'm sure there are so many that I don't even know about. So yeah, even like when I was saying like, why is sugar so bad? Like, just, I don't know, that misconceptions in our society for sure.
Yeah.
So Kylie, I ask, in conclusion, carbohydrates, are they the culprit or the hero?
I would definitely say hero.
Yay!
If you are listening, we imagine that you are probably on your own health journey. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of this journey. We want to invite you to consider these 3 questions as a weekly personal check-in.
The first question is that maintaining a positive mindset is crucial for success. So, what are your victories and your wins from the past week?
Second question, what are your intentions or focus or goals for this next week? Reminder that the simpler and more realistic, the better.
And the last question is, what are you going to do to accomplish this goal? Be specific, and we invite you to write this down somewhere. What specific things will you do to reach this goal of yours?
Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you are listening to, we would invite you to subscribe. We'd also invite you to leave a review. If you do, you will be entered into our monthly drawing to win a box of meal deliveries. Take a screenshot of your review and send it to Complete Nutrition, complete with a K, completenutrition@gmail.com. You can also check us out online at www.complete-nutrition.com or on Instagram at complete_nutrition.